loved doing it. One more time.
Oh, right over here.
If anybody was asleep, yes. Welcome to the workshop. The date is November 1st, 5 o'clock, and call to order. And we have two people missing this evening, our mayor. He is away, and also Councilman Cavalier. And we don't have to excuse them. They're just free. Okay. So, we'll do a roll call of the people that are here. It says roll call.
All right, Councilmember Pizzillo?
Aye.
Councilmember Sousa?
Everybody's here.
Everybody
Here.
Councilmember Lortano?
Here.
Councilmember Osborne?
Here.
And Vice Mayor Whip?
Here. See, you put roll call, so you understand I follow those things. Okay, agenda items for discussion. We're going to start out with our first one this evening, and we have Larry Lang. And Larry, would you like to present?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Lord. Tonight's discussion is about financial reporting. We're going to go through various financial reports that the City Council receives or the public receives at various times, what are in those reports, what are not in those reports, and we'll try to do this relatively quickly, but there is a fairly long list of reports that is available to you or that we are proposing as we move forward. The reports that we're going to talk about tonight include a detailed budget report by category, which would otherwise be referred to as a monthly expenditure report. Likewise, we have a monthly revenue report, an accounts payable report, sales tax report, development services report, and a quarterly financial report. We're also proposing that we add 3 new reports that we will provide you. One is a CIP project dashboard report and also a capital report, and as we discussed when we adopted the investment policy, that we're going to provide you an investment report once we change our investment program a little bit. And so in doing this, we want to show you these reports in kind of a hierarchy, and we're going to start with the base of the pyramid, which are your reports that have a lot of detail, a lot of information, raw data. We don't put a lot of analysis into them, and they're primarily used by budget analysts and the departments to monitor how they're doing in their budgets, but also are available if you want to look back and see something from a higher level report. It's something you can look back at. And I want to use the analogy in this of seeing the forest for the trees. And these reports are the ones that are down in the trees. And these are the ones we're going to review first. Several of these reports, or all of these, are or will be available on our Transparency and Government Spending webpage. We make these reports available for the public as well as for the City Council so that you can see this information at any point in time. And the ones we're going to talk about this evening that are on the Transparency webpage are circled up on the screen, which is the accounts payable, the expenditures, and the revenue reports. The quarterly financial summary will be discussed a little bit later in the presentation. This report is a report of a detailed budget report comparing expenditures on a line item level to the budget. The first column's in there, towards the top you can see that 25% of the year has lapsed. That represents just a simple counting on the calculator. 3 months, this is through September, so it's 25% of our fiscal year. If you look, we'll pop up a little bit of this so you can actually read the columns in here for those of us that maybe are challenged a little bit. This department that we're showing you happens to be the mayor and council department. And the columns that we show, the first three columns show current, which is your budget for that period, which is a month, the actual for that month, and then for the total year, what the budget is year to date, and actual year to date, and then the final columns are where we are for the whole year. And you'll notice on the top line item, you're at 22% for the entire year. What this report will tell you is that it'll show you how actual expenditures at a line item compare to the budget. And it does give you totals by category and division. But the difficult part of this report is if you look on our webpage, I believe it's about 170 pages long. And so if you're trying to get an overall assessment of where the city is, it's very difficult to do out of this report. Also, it doesn't tell you why something has a variance that it might show. Let's see here. I might have just gone twice on this one. The next report in is, okay, there we go. The next report is a monthly revenue report. It's in a very similar format. That'll show you for the current month where we are compared to the budget, year to date where we are compared to the budget, and it gives you an annual estimate. This particular highlighted one shows you that our property tax revenue, the budget, which is really calculated based on 25% of the year. It is not calculated based on expected cash flow. Shows you our budget for the month was about $500,000, and our budget for the year to date is about $1.5 million, but we've only collected $4,500. That would imply a problem. Well, our property tax collections, the first half of your property taxes are due October 1st. And the second half are due March 1st. So this is actually a normal trend. This report doesn't really show you that normal trend. As I indicated, it gives you the numbers, but it doesn't tell you why.
Larry, is there a report that you could do that? For example, show budgeted, if it happens that when the money comes in October, it will show that the money's not due until October, so the variance is a little easier to understand, I guess, from a novice, to see when you expect the money to come in versus when it's come in, and then what that variance happens to be.
And I think that's the importance of the hierarchy. When we get to the quarterly report that we will review with the City Council, you do show that higher level that gives you some explanations as to why they are. This allows you to go in and find questions, if you will, but that report hopefully will answer a lot of those questions. And that's part of why we're going through this discussion, is to look at the hierarchy and which reports will give you that benefit. Next report I want to talk about is the Accounts Payable report. This has been historically provided monthly in your council packets, and it's been approved by the City Council. The reason it's been approved is in your ordinances, it talks about, in the code, it talks about order of business, and it lists bills payable in the middle. Well, these reports are actually a report of what has been paid. They are not reports of payments coming due. So by the time you're being asked to approve them and you're seeing them on the agenda, they've been paid.
Well, they're not monthly either. I mean, we're getting them every few months.
Lately, we haven't been, planning for this discussion. Our recommendation is actually that we just post them, and we have been posting them on the website. We can bring them back to you monthly if you want to see them, but quite honestly, there isn't a lot of information that's provided in this other than vendors that are paid. As you can see in the example that we have on the screen, we can see who we paid, how much money, and a general description of what that is. But if they had multiple invoices, you're only going to get one of those invoices. So our recommendation is that we just post this on the website, make it available for anyone who wants to see. We're sure not trying to hide the data, but I think we spend a lot of time looking at information that really makes it difficult for you to have any information
Yes, I
on.
remember, we talked about, the last time we had a discussion on this, there were some items that weren't understandable as far as who it was charged to. I think we had, Visa?
Yeah.
Remember, we had a whole list of Visa, and I think we questioned the council, how do we know, what is that for? And so.
There are several items from time to time that would question, because they seem out of kilter. But then we get explanation from staff, and that resolves the question. So.
Well, I can understand, I mean, I never really understood why we were voting on something after the fact.
it's already
you
done.
know. Exactly. But I think as a council, to see quarterly or monthly, you know, the percentage of what each department spent in a certain way. I mean, one of the things that we've discussed in the past years was the fact that we were seeing so many consultants and contractors.
Right.
It was like, we need to, you know, bring that down a notch. And that was apparent because of those expenditure reports. So that was, to me,
Well, and we can
important.
do that quarterly with no problem.
But to be voting on something that was after the fact is,
Sorry, what I'm hearing you say, you want them quarterly, or you don't want them quarterly?
no, I think we still need to see.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah,
You
I
do?
agree. I agree.
Sherry?
We can send
I
them
would,
out.
yes. I think it helps out.
And I think you, Councilman Souza said you like it,
Yeah,
they like
yeah.
it too.
Yeah, okay.
The only question I would have is, if there is a question on that, you know, would you get it before the meeting, ask it during the meeting? There wouldn't be an item on the agenda that says.
Well, what we
you know,
will do, we'll discuss it later, but what we will do is send these to you, quarterly or monthly. We have no problem with that, but we can send them to you separately, not be on the agenda.
Yeah.
Because it is
That's fine.
foolish to have something on the agenda for approval that's already done.
I ask the questions most of the time beforehand anyway.
Yeah, okay.
So the mechanics would be, if there's a question, to try to get it resolved before
Yes.
the meeting, is those things, okay? Because you still want to have that opportunity, if, like you say, if you have a question on something specific, do that at that point. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. One of the proposed new reports is what we're referring to as a CIP project dashboard report. And this, again, gets down into the details quite a bit. It'll take each project within the CIP. It'll show the status of the project, the percentage completion, the budget expended on it, the notes, and that type of thing. I apologize for the difficulty in reading this. It's why I say it's in the detail level. This is just what it would look like for one project, where the information on it, it'll show you what the project name is, what percentage of completion, what's going on with the project, what are the dates, and how it's coming. We're proposing to post this on a monthly basis on the website to make it available for you and for anyone to be able to see this report.
You're providing magnifying glasses.
Hopefully, as you look at it, when it's a document to itself, it's a little bit more legible.
I have a magnifying glass sitting on my desk.
I'd be using it too.
I tell you what comes helpful, though, Larry, on those CIPs, and I think you incorporated some in your report, John, that you send to us monthly, is just the status overall of some of the major ones, because a lot of times we'll be asked questions, you know, from our constituents who are out there, and it's kind of nice to know specifically where that happens to be, not to the detail, but say, for example, the opening of I-10, you know, I was asked that just the other day and knew that was coming towards the, you know, the end of the month, so I could give them some solace on that. But that's kind of helpful, because you get people asking all the time when that's going to be done, and you could say, well, it's close to 90% or 80%. So I just think in the report, if it's incorporated, especially on the major ones, so that when we get questions, we can just kind of, you know,
And we
pass
do
that
try
on.
to do that, so if
I
we
see
ever
it.
miss some, let us know. Okay, so.
That's what I think is helpful, because we get asked that, at least I get asked that quite a bit.
And some of the projects, just using your example, when you talk about I-10,
Yeah.
that will not show up on the CIP because we are not at all part of that. But still, of
But still,
course,
that's
good
kind of right,
information
yeah.
for you to be passing along. So we've gone through the reports that are kind of at the tree level within our discussion, or the bottom of the pyramid, if you will. The next level up are some reports that are broader in perspective. You start to see a little bit broader a picture, but they're still narrowed down to specific areas. And these reports, rather than just reading them there, I'll just talk a little bit about each of those. First is the sales tax report, which is provided to you on a monthly basis via email from the city manager. And we are proposing to continue doing that as we have in the past. What this report does do is show you how we're doing compared to our estimates, how we're doing compared to last year. What it does not do is show you trends on the remaining 45% of our general fund revenues. The sales tax represents 55% of our general fund revenues. The other 45 may not follow this trend whatsoever. This particular is kind of a cover sheet that goes, this happens to be for the month of September, and shows just how we vary against the prior year. You'll notice we're showing comparisons without the rate increase and with the rate increase, so we can see same year. This particular one, which happens to be September's report, talks about the month of September being down about 5% in total sales tax. But if you look at the budget, line 1C on there, we're actually 7% ahead of the budget. The 5% was down from the prior year, and the primary cause of that is construction sales tax, which we expected to drop. Or looking at these detailed sheets, we would normally not include as many years in a chart as we do in this, but like this and in the development revenue one coming up, it's important to see our baseline of 2007, 2008, where we've been on these numbers, and that's why we're showing you so much history on the chart. But what we show is the two green lines in each month. The one that's solid green is the actual collections, and then the one that's green in the top half of it, multicolored there, will show you what the collections are without the sales tax increase. So that way you can compare to the prior year and see it on the same dollar basis.
It certainly indicates that without the 5% increase, we would be in dire trouble at the present time.
This one shows, for example, that the month of September we collected about $400,000 because of that increase.
And to answer your
Against,
question,
against what?
$400,000 against what we would have collected had the sales tax rate not been in place for that month.
Yeah, what was that figure?
2.1 million versus
I'm sorry.
2 million for, and it's harder to read on this. I'm reading it on the screen because I can see it. 2,086,725 versus 2,452,390. That's with the detail, and that's on this particular chart that's on the bottom of that page.
Yeah.
Very hard to read
That
those
one you can't
numbers.
read. The one up above is readable. This one's
Yeah.
not readable.
Is that summary one, Larry, that has that in there as well, too, doesn't it? That sales tax summary report, the two back shows with or without the budgeted versus,
This
yeah,
one?
does that one show the budgeted with and without the half% sales tax?
It does show, no, it doesn't show the budget because we only budgeted one way. So
I
the
know.
budget's our expectations. So line 1C is the budget for the year.
Okay.
1A is without the sales tax, 1B is with it. Now you notice down on the fifth line down, restaurant and bar sales tax, there was no rate change, so we're only showing one number, and that's comparing it to prior year.
Yeah, and my question kind of boils down to is, without it, if we're 6% now above with it, we would be X amount of percent, below without it, I guess is what I'm kind of getting at. And that can be determined by this sheet here?
We compare to the prior year. We do not compare the current year budget to what it would be without it, because the budget is.
I realize that, but I'm just getting from a visual standpoint, to get to what Dick Seuss is talking about, you could see what the gap would be if that was taken into consideration. I realize from a budget standpoint, but you track how much money that 0.5% sales tax is bringing in. So if you would show that, you would show you underwater at this point by X amount of dollars.
No,
if
that's what-
Line,
is that-
line 2C on this chart which is the top one that's a little easier to read on your handouts. Line 2C shows the difference. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's the difference between 2B and 2A, which comes close to what that is, but it's about $365,000 is the difference between them. That's 497 of line 2B minus the 132 of 2A.
But you kind of understand where I'm kind of coming from Dick Seuss's question, is you could see that even if we're 6% up by budgeted, if the 0.5% sales tax in there, we might be 15% below.
No,
I guess
he's
it's
just comparing these
I know,
figures,
I
not
know.
comparing it to the total
right,
budget.
no, I understand. But what I'm talking about is the sales tax, 0.5% sales tax increase. If you showed that, you could see that difference on how much that significant it would be. I realize you're budgeting it with it in, but if you didn't have it, you'd be in the hole right now, as John had mentioned, by X amount of dollars or X amount of percentage. Does that kind of, I think that gets to
Well,
what
yeah,
you
and-
were asking there, Dick.
When you put percentages out there, it's hard to comprehend sometimes when you're going against dollar values. But if you're going dollar versus dollar, that to me is very, very impressive. So,
Larry, I have a question about the next report, the one that, the sales tax, the chart.
This one?
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to keep 2007 on there, even as I can tell there's only so much line, because that's kind of before the recession hit really hard, so it kind of shows more of a benchmark in a healthy economy, because I'd hate for someone to pull that up once 2007 falls
I
off.
agree with you. I think we need that comparison because that's when everybody, the dialogue people have, it's when it's going to return to the high days before. And I agree with you, Sherry, that I know it takes more room, it makes a little more crowded chart,
Right.
but I think it tells a history that needs to be reminded.
Otherwise, we look like we're going to be doing much better than we are.
That is our intent.
Oh, good.
In this, is to keep those base years in. I think it's hard to get a frame of reference if you don't have it.
Okay,
And
thank
I think
you.
that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay. The next sales tax report that we show, and you do get this monthly with the packet also, what this one shows is where we are, and historically, for 2007 through 10, it shows fiscal year-to-date actuals. That's what the FYTD stands for, fiscal year-to-date actuals. So for each of those years, that's where we were in actual collections. The next column shows year-end actuals. And for those 4 years, again, 2007 through 2010, those were the year-end actuals for non-construction sales tax. The final column then is the percentage of actual, where were we at this point in time compared to the year-end actual. Now, the reason I bring that up is in 2011, we're showing our actual, the first column, fiscal year-to-date actual for the same period of time. But we don't know what the year-end actual is going to be yet. So we give you, in 2011, that is the budgeted amount. And you can see, and here's what I get out of this schedule when I look at it, you can see that we're at 24.52% of the budget. The key figure for me is how does that percentage compare to the prior year's percentage of actual? In this particular one, I would use 2007, 8, and 9 as the comparison, and we compare very well. We're holding strong at that point. The reason I don't use 2010 is after these first 3 months is when the rate increase took effect. So it distorted those year-to-year comparisons. But you want that number to be as high as possible. The higher that this number is, especially compared to the prior years, the better that that number looks.
Yeah, I like the schedules, but from my perspective, I always zero in on the budgeted amount. And the only reason being is everything drives off of that. You have things in place to control the expenditures through the procurement process. So I'm always curious, budgeted versus the trend line, because if we budgeted, say, 1,000 and we're on track for 900, then we're going to be 10% short. So again, I know the actual comparisons are always nice to see where we're going. But from a budget standpoint, being the former budget guy, I always like to see where the budgeted numbers are, because if they start sliding, you got to quickly start making adjustments from an expense standpoint, because your expenses were based on what you thought the budget or the revenues were going to be. So just like any business, whatever you think your sales are going to be, if they start sliding, you got to make adjustments on the expenditure side or maybe what you're hiring there. So again, I think that's always key is when you have those budgeted comparisons, at least from my perspective, because that's what I usually zero in on.
Next report I'm going to briefly talk about is the Development Services Report. This is also provided to the City Council on a monthly basis. And we're proposing to continue distributing on that basis. This report, while it looks similar to the sales tax report, comes from a completely different source of information and is available at a different point in time than the other reports. And so you will not get this at the same time you get the sales tax report. You'll get this one sooner. This chart, again, we go back to 2007. It creates a lot of bars on there, but that gets back to when the building permit activity was, if you will, fairly normal. And you can see where those trends are through 2008 and started dropping. 2011, as you can see, when you compare to the first 3 months of last fiscal year, we're doing about the same. However, when you compare to this particular chart, and because of the nature of, I'm not sure that the trends that we had in the past years with the tax credits and their impacts, we're comparing the budget. We have not done this budget on a monthly basis based on past trends. So you see that the budget is divided equally over the 12-month period of time, and we're short of our budget numbers at this point in time.
Yeah.
If that trend were to continue, that would total about $800,000. But the future months, if you look at the previous page, the future months were considerably lower, or in general they were lower. The one yellow one that was real high was in January, which was when we received $1.3 million from Westcorp.
Westcorp, yeah.
Well, let me make sure I have this one correctly. Okay, so you're showing the revenues in the first report, and then you're showing correct, these are revenues?
All of these are the revenues by month in this report.
And then the next report, you're showing what the revenues were compared to what you budgeted as being revenues.
That
And
is correct.
if it tallied out the way it's going right now, we'd be short 800,000 is what you're saying. So what, rather than waiting till the end of the year and going, okay, we're short 800,000, what are we doing in the meantime? Are you changing your budgeted figures, or how are you?
No, we aren't. We're monitoring this very closely. We had 17 permits, for example, this last month, against 57 last year, so 40 less single-family permits. But this is also engineering permits and all planning type permits. We monitor it, and we already have such a cut staff for development purposes. It's difficult to cut many more. So we're watching it, but we're seeing that the budget is basically going to be okay because we have overages in other areas that are making these overages. But this is a very important highlight that we're continuing to watch monthly.
Okay, well, and I'm not asking that anyone's cut. I'm just saying, how are you going to accommodate for the loss here in another area?
And the loss will be made up from other areas within the budget.
Do those include the tenant improvements too in here? Is that included too?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that's every permit.
Yes.
And this number is not shown as much for its impact on the revenues. The sales tax, as we talked about 55% of our total general fund revenues. These numbers are, just doing quickly in my head, somewhere 7 or 8% of our revenue base. Okay, the estimates for the sales tax. So we're looking at this more from a trend of where we've been than we are completely as a standalone revenue.
And I think, John, we've had this discussion where at some point we get an entire picture of the general fund by category, because like Larry mentioned, sales tax is 45% of the total. So at some point, if you can compare all of the general fund budgeted revenue to the trend of the actuals, then that would get to the point that, Councilmember Osborne's talking about, because then you could see one short, but the other one's over, and the net effect is.
And we are working on a new report that isn't even in here, Joe, from our discussions about that.
Okay.
And that will probably be available next month.
Perfect, thank you. That'll kind of address what you're.
I'm going to talk very quickly about investment report. We talked about this when we implemented the investment policy. After we have an investment advisor on board, if we start doing our investments outside of LGIP at all, we will be reporting back to you on a quarterly basis. I do not have a form of that report, but I wanted to remind you that that's a report we have committed to.
Yeah. I noticed that we're going to be adding three new reports. Is there any way to streamline what we've discussed prior to this going into this report with the other reports that we make? The number of reports that you reported on prior to this.
Okay, I think as we get through this presentation, I'll kind of summarize for you what levels we're going to do, because this is a lot of reports, this is a lot of information that you get, and what levels that the reports are looked at, and how you're going to be receiving them, and where you can gain some of that overview that you're looking for without having to get bogged down too much in the details. So if we don't get that answered by the end, let's come back to that.
Well, I'm concerned about, John is telling us that, he has a minimal amount of people on staff right now. And if we're giving him new reports, it's just going to increase the workload on your department. So.
That's correct. And as we're monitoring these reports, what we're adding is generally information that is not creating new.
It's readily available.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more item, just to add work to you, as you were just saying. Recently, I was in a meeting with Westcor, and there were certain reports that they thought were very beneficial to them to receive either on a monthly or quarterly basis. Are there reports that maybe we should be giving to our economic development departments to help show some of the strengths that's starting to reoccur within our city and use that?
We do that. They get all of these reports, and we go over them with them. And
Okay.
so
But I mean, just from this meeting, we found out Westcor wanted some more.
Westcor doesn't get them.
Right. But
But-
maybe there's others that we're not thinking about that would be.
But I don't know if we can actually, Westcor has the ability to go online,
Sure.
just like
Well,
any
that's what you-
citizen, and look at the reports.
I guess I think what Joanne's getting at is that we want Westcor to come.
It's a positive
You know,
tool that we could use.
we want it to
obviously.
move a little faster, and so what she's saying is if we take that extra step, is that going to be a benefit to the city, and is the benefit worth the extra work that somebody has to do that? I don't know. I think is that the question you're
that's
asking?
exactly
That's
what
what
I'm
she's
getting
asking.
at. But there may be other. I'm just out of the box thinking there may be other areas out there that some of this information would be helpful to those other entities, whoever they may be.
Okay, thank you.
And I think a lot of it's to do, we don't know what information that they ask for and what information they give out. I remember I went to economic development, I said, we have some good school districts here. We have some good things happening. Do you use that in your reports and you're selling, our city, and shy away from Arizona totally? And so I understand what she's talking about with.
Okay.
It just provides them with another sales tool, I
Right.
think, effective sales tool. It's
We're also proposing to add a capital report, which would provide a little bit more information on the status of selected CIP projects, and this would be submitted to you on a quarterly basis. This is a little bit higher level. What this shows is you've got a green and a yellow line. The green line shows the budget by category. The yellow line shows where we expect to spend out of that budget. Early on in the process, those are going to be the same. But as the year wears on, if the project gets completed and we didn't spend it all, you might see the yellow line shortening from the green line. I wouldn't expect the yellow line to go over the green line. Then the final one is fiscal year 11 committed to date. And what that's showing is what's been committed on it. And the commitment could be what's under contract. It might be what's been paid. but it's a broader definition, but it shows what's been happening in those projects. So we added a column outside of the chart then that shows the percentage committed to give you a perspective of where that is. So that takes us through our Tier 2 reports. And then the next step in this process is the quarterly financial report. And this is the report that has a broader array of information. It includes some analysis that answers some of the questions that you've been asking this evening. And it's used, I think, by management, the council, and the general public to kind of see overall how we're doing. Terry Canada, our budget manager, will actually be presenting the first quarter's quarterly report to you next week. It's a much more detailed report for information on the fiscal year. It includes revenues and expenditures. Most of those are your operating revenues and expenditures. Have budgeted amounts versus actual, the variances, those types of things. It's available about 5 weeks after the end of the quarter, and one of the reasons for that is we try to include the sales tax information that takes us 3 to 4 weeks after the end of the month before we get that data. This is an example of the revenues. You'll notice in there we show the general fund revenues by major category. So we're giving you a total and then by category. And in this, it also shows those top revenues. This happens to be the fourth quarterly report for last year. And it'll show in there what the revenues are, what the budget was, where you are actual, and what your variance from your original budget is. I just popped that out so you could kind of read a little bit because I know it's hard to see on the screen. Likewise, there's a narrative in there that discusses the particular revenue source and what it's about. This particular one that we've highlighted is on the construction sales tax and shows how that's doing. The next category then is on the expenditures, and here we're showing the expenditures by department. And this again is for the fourth quarter, and we show the original budget and we show fourth quarter actuals with a year-to-date variance and where we were. As an example, you'll notice the city attorney was under budget considerably for the year, and in the narrative it's explained that that had to do with the litigation money that didn't proceed as rapidly and was carried over to this current budget year. There is also a narrative in here that talks about categories of expenditures, where they are on the budget and so forth. We've modified this. Well, it's actually, you can see it below. We also include department highlights that might show a particular department, why that department is showing much different than what you might expect.
So Larry, this would, like last year, there were questions about the fire, the overtime. That would be in the narrative for this. So if someone pulled it up, they could actually see why all of a sudden, like, something's ballooned in a category.
That's correct. And for those types of things, that's why we thought this year to have a report from our budget manager also reviewing it with you. Now, in the first quarter, you aren't going to see a lot of that type of thing. But as we move forward, you'll see more.
She's going to give this report next Monday.
That's correct.
When will the document be available?
It's in draft stages now. It may or may not be available in advance of that, but we're going over the highlights with it. You'll be able to take a copy home with you if it doesn't get to you ahead of time.
I would just suggest, I don't know about my other fellow members, is on something like that, if we could see it a little bit before, we might be able to save time going through because we could read it. If we got any questions, you may answer it during the presentation. And then it kind of removes the question, but it gives you time to digest it. After the fact, we move on to another subject matter, into something else. I just think it's helpful when we get quarterly like that is if we could see it in advance so we can read it. And if we have any questions, we might even ask you before so that it speeds the process up as more. So I just think there's value in seeing those before. Personally, I don't know about the others, but
This was in a work session?
Yeah.
Yes, we're certainly
This
trying
is
to
the
do
next
that.
one, the next meeting. Can I remind you, the mayor and I will be out of town, so I would like to be able to be briefed after I get back. I'm
Absolutely.
sure the mayor also.
What we're balancing in this also, as I told you, by the time we get the sales tax information, it's a lot of information to put together. We're balancing that it'll be November 8th, and we're talking about data that goes through September. And so we're trying to get you the data relatively quickly, but we will sure try to get that to you. One of the things that we're adding this year, it's a change in our practice, is that included with this report, we're going to be giving you recommended budget transfers. Most of these are, I'm going to call them very accounting in nature. I'm sure Councilman Pizzillo could remember the days fondly of doing these types of transfers.
I don't know about fondly, but I do remember those days.
Historically, we've presented these as part of the next year's budget, and so you've really approved them after the fact, and we want to bring them forward to you at a more detailed level on a quarterly basis. And those will be presented as part of that report next week in work session. They'll be on the consent calendar for approval with the assumption that any questions that you have will be discussed beforehand. You will get a copy of that with your council packet. We're also providing a quarterly financial report, and this is attached to it. This is on the capital improvement plan, which just gives you a summary of where the project is, the budget, actual, and just kind of a snapshot of the CIP all on one page. It's a very busy schedule, but it's a schedule that I like to look at periodically and helps me kind of understand where everything is on that. So overall, on the quarterly financial report, what are our recommendations? We're planning on having that available for you approximately 5 weeks after the end of the quarter. We're going to be adding sections for the budget transfer detail as well as the CIP project summary. And we're doing this to emphasize trends and highlights for you as part of it. After the presentation to you, it will be posted on the website so that everyone has access to it. So a very quick summary of reports that will be available on the website. The detailed budget report, the revenue report, the accounts payable report, and the CIP project dashboard. Reports distributed by the city manager will include the sales tax, development services, the investment report, capital report, and the
Larry,
quarterly
would you just
financial.
review the reports that have not been on prior to this time on the web so the public can hear this so that they know what additional ones are in this list?
Yes, the accounts payable report, which is the third one down, is one that we've added to the web for the past few months to make that available. That's one that used to be available only in a council agenda because that's where it was included. The CIP project dashboard will be new to the web. Most of those, I believe, that are the ones distributed by the city manager, I think we're going to include those also. I'm not sure we've gone through the mechanics of some of those, like the sales tax reports. A couple of those, the sales tax report, the development services report, those are areas of interest because of unique situations with the economy. I think they're of unique interest to you. As far as the revenue analysis goes, as I indicated from the development services report, it's getting so low now that it's not as big a part of our budget as several others. So to kind of quickly go through here on the report hierarchy, just as kind of an overall summary, the base reports that we would definitely include on the web are those reports that are more raw data. They really don't give you any additional analysis. They do give you a tool for analysis as you look from information that you receive elsewhere, have questions, or they may generate additional questions which you would want to provide us. The next tier up are those that are a little bit broader. They will generally be distributed to you by the city manager. include sales tax reports, development services, the investments, and so forth. And then finally, the quarterly financial report, which will summarize a lot of that data and hopefully help bring it all together for you a little bit. So that's a list of about 9 different reports with some other additions within a couple of those. And again, our recommendations are that the ones that we talk about, a little bit more focus on the quarterly reports. With that, I take for any questions, and then I think I kind of brushed past some of your questions on the accounts payable reports and that to kind of look at the whole spectrum of reports for any follow-up that you would like and changes for this that you would like. Entertain that.
So any questions from the council?
I have one.
Joanne?
It's great that you're showing transparency to general public, giving them all this information. I appreciate that. I'm curious, though, when you look at the traffic of your reports in the past, have they been used? Do people truly look at them? Have you ever looked
We
at
have
them?
not checked the website. We'll do that.
Yeah, I think that'd
I'm
be a
just
good
curious.
idea.
I mean, you're
agree.
giving great information, but I'm curious as to who's seeing it.
You haven't, have you?
No.
No, we'll do that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just real quick, I'll wait till see the quarterly that comes out because that usually generates some questions for me because, again, a lot of this stuff's old home week anyway that I'm looking at. But from my perspective, even though I'm technically have the background, I do like the executive summary pieces that, we discussed with John, and I do like the quarterly reports because I can go in there at a high level. And again, from my perspective, I always like to keep it simple. Are the budgeted numbers on track for, the actuals? And if that's the case or not the case, as Councilmember Osborne had mentioned, that's when the adjustments at some point, have to be made. So that's always kind of my trigger. And even as a budget manager are we tracking, budgets versus actual, for the total. So
You just don't want any surprises.
yeah, that's why I like the quarterly. So I'll look forward to that presentation.
Anything else? Larry, thank you. That was a very complete report. We appreciate it. Next on the agenda is Mike Svets, and he's going to give a presentation on the current policy for landscape maintenance in the city right-of-way and policy alternatives. Welcome. Oh. Well, you can tell him what that's all.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Council. I will try and walk you through something that will be coming before you, hopefully in ordinance form in December. Basically, in my short tenure here with the city, right-of-way and median landscaping and the maintenance thereof is a fairly complex issue. In particular, who's responsible for what? There is not a week, a month that goes by without that question in a different part of the city coming up. Whether it comes across Jennifer Campbell's desk or my desk or John's desk or your desk, especially in these down economic times. Tonight, we'll kind of walk you through what right-of-way and median landscaping is. City right-of-way median landscape trends, the zoning ordinance that was passed in December of '06, provide you with some picture examples of it, comparison of how we maintain right-of-way and median throughout the city based on the different areas, and some potential alternatives for ordinance modification, and as always, allow you to ask any questions, and again, feel free to ask them as we go through. Parks Division is are the folks that are responsible for landscape maintenance within right-of-ways and medians. This is the work that obviously is done by the Parks Division. Bring your attention to the areas that are highlighted in red. These are the major functions that are associated with landscape maintenance within right-of-ways. You've got water management as well as obviously irrigation system maintenance associated with that, trees and shrubs maintenance, contract administration, and plan review for design and construction. These are the lands that we service. Tonight we're here to talk about right-of-way and median landscaping. Quick definitions. Right-of-way landscaping. is the planting beds and irrigation that are generally found between the curb and sidewalk along streets. The median landscaping are the planting beds and irrigation that are found in the medians, or commonly referred to as the islands in the middle of the street. It's important to note on the right-of-way landscaping that it is typically found between the curb and the sidewalk. Throughout the city, you will see a lot of landscaping that is from the inside edge of that sidewalk back to side walls. And those are commonly referred to as development tracts and are privately owned by HOAs, commercial areas, so on and so forth. These are our work trends. We showed this through the CBC. Thought it would be advantageous for everybody to take a look at it. Since 2006, there's been about 7 million additional square feet added to our plate in terms of right-of-way and median landscaping. It's about a 48% increase. We are, for the most part, caught up. We have very few new areas that are coming online. A lot of this, obviously, was due to the growth that took place in the mid-2000s. The zoning ordinance in 2000 that was adopted in December of 2006, this kind of capsulizes for you what we are responsible for. Arterial street right-of-ways adjacent to single-family residential areas that back or side onto arterial streets and have a screening wall constructed on that property line. Confusing a little bit, yes.
I asked him last night for a picture. I know we're getting one.
We'll get to the pictures. Median islands on arterial and collector streets, that's a little bit more simple. But then also you have dedicated street right-of-ways that abut municipal facilities, such as public safety facility on Estrella, Foothills Park, elementary schools, and high school. This is an example of arterial and collector streets. This is just an Estrella example. It seems to be an easy area because it has a fairly dense area for us to focus on. Estrella Parkway, Elliott, San Gabriel, San Miguel, Golf Club Drive, West Star, and Calistoga. We don't take care of the Springs, the couple of other obvious streets, side streets, but these are the main thoroughfares and or collectors in that area that we maintain. This is the fun part, and I purposely, I kind of went back and forth, much to the chagrin probably of Mr. Dalkey, of not showing you what we are responsible for with some red lines. And it just gives you an example of what we as a staff deal with. What you see on the left-hand side of that screen is typically what I refer to as residential area that has screening walls along Estrella Parkway. What we as a city are responsible for is that small sliver that is between the curb and the sidewalk. What you see between the sidewalk and that rear or side screening wall is actual development track and is responsible of the HOA. On the flip side of the street, you see a bunch of open space. According to the way the zoning ordinance is written right now, we are not responsible for anything on that side of the street.
Who's responsible for it?
The HOA.
The HOA.
Or adjacent property owner, whatever that may be. In this case, it may be the HOA, it may be Newland. But in this case, we are not responsible for it. I think it's important to note what I did not say when we went through the right-of-way examples is that we don't take care of any right-of-way in commercial areas. So where we'll use Litchfield Road or Indian School Road or McDowell Road as an example. Unless there's an agreement in which we have agreed to take care of right-of-ways adjacent to commercial property, we are not responsible for that on those using those examples of streets. The property owner is. The only thing that we will take care of on those streets is the medians or the islands.
Mike, is that where I guess code enforcement is having its biggest challenge right now with some of those areas?
Yeah, and I think I'll point some of those challenges out as we go through based on just interpretation of the current zoning ordinance, the enforcement of it, and the challenges and complexity associated with it.
Mike, so from previous times when a street has been dedicated to the city from a developer, and we take it over, is there, I know we're going into it probably in the next few slides, but contractually, when we've taken over that street, within some of those contracts, would it also state that we are taking over the landscaping or any of that? Could we find ourselves in a situation where that could be the problem?
It could be, but I think as we go through some of these examples, we'll show that any changes made to the ordinances that are currently on the books would apply only prospectively.
Okay.
So we would take care of, for lack of a better phrase, existing conditions or what we're already currently
Just looking at
taking
the
care of.
future for that now.
Correct. Future growth.
Mike, let's use Litchfield, Indian School on Litchfield Road, south to Thomas. We have islands in the center of that roadway.
Correct.
Who's responsible for the upkeep of that vegetation?
In the islands or medians, we are, as a city, responsible for that, yes.
So all of that, like Pebble Creek along that wall, all that landscaping on Indian School, that belongs to the HOAs, what you're
Correct.
saying?
Correct. With me so far?
Yep, got you.
Okay. Just a real quick example, maybe to highlight Mr. Sousa's point. This is Collector Street with a median right down the middle. Obviously, we are responsible for that. That is West Star Drive in Estrella. And then here's an example that shows the right-of-way that we're taking care of. And this one's actually a very good example to point out, simply because of the meandering sidewalk. The end of the right-of-way does not meander. It is a straight line that is drawn parallel to the street, 31 feet off of center. That meandering sidewalk obviously can create problems. Depending upon how wide that road is on any given side, we may be on the outside edge of the sidewalk on one side of the street, and we may be on the inside edge of the sidewalk on the other side of the street. When you start drawing that line, either on the inside edge or the outside edge of that sidewalk, you're potentially inheriting or not inheriting plants, trees, or shrubs because of the meandering sidewalk. You may end up, it's just how it ends up being. And that complexity in and of itself in terms of who's responsible for what, typically if we're in a specific area, we will most definitely take care of it because it doesn't make sense to skip over one or two shrubs or one or two trees to do what we need to do. But this is an example of where we would take care of both sides of the right-of-way. We have the residential on one side, public facility, park and school on the other.
And in our design guidelines, we want those meandering sidewalks.
Exactly.
Mike,
So Mike, for the school and the park up there, you're both sides of the sidewalk, right?
We are both sides of the street, from the inside edge of the sidewalk for the most part to the curb.
Okay.
And then obviously on the park side, we're responsible for everything else because we own that.
Mike, when I first started on the council, there was a area of dispute of whether it was the cities or the Palm Valley HOA between, was it 144th, Avenue right off of Indian School. And at that point, the city had owned it. I guess it wasn't transferred. The HOA wanted it so they could maintain it. And I know there was a couple times the city had to go in and, and take care of some of the dead shrubs. And do you know which part I'm talking about?
I know exactly what part you're
Is
talking
that
about.
resolved? Does the HOA own that now, or does the city still own it?
I think part of it is something that we're responsible for. What the HOA was concerned with is our frequencies did not match up with their frequencies. And so they were thinking that they would be willing to take that over via an agreement. However, because it is a community facilities district, we were able to add that area and match up the frequencies associated with it.
Okay, good. So we won't have any more issues probably with that one.
No, we shouldn't.
Okay, great.
At least not now.
Okay.
This gives you an example of the service level comparisons that we have citywide. Estrella, we break them up into 4 areas. Estrella, Palm Valley, CFD, Wildflower, and then the improved areas north and south of I-10 that don't fall within any of the 3 previous categories. Estrella, you can see, will match up well with Palm Valley, CFD. The difference between the two, with the exception of a couple of different numbers in those categories, is the funding source. And so I think when you compare then Estrella to Wildflower, and you compare Estrella in particular to improved areas north and south, it will look very much like Estrella has a higher level of service. This is something that I have had discussions with both with Estrella residents as well as council members on and off over the last year. Part of the reason why Estrella, actually the large reason why Estrella requires that level of maintenance is because of the density. It is an extremely densely planted area, and if we did not maintain at that level, we would end up losing plants and shrubs left and right. They would just become completely overgrown. They would completely compete for each other, for water, sunlight, nutrients in the ground, and we would end up losing a lot of the landscape maintenance up there. In some of the newer areas of Estrella, it is not nearly as densely planted as it has been previously. But that is an example as to why Estrella is, or the reason why Estrella has a higher level of service. Palm Valley CFD is paid for completely out of the Community Facilities District funds. The funding source does allow for that to occur. Wildflower has a higher level of service, but we are tied to a development agreement in Wildflower, and then the improved areas north and south of I-10 have a lower level of frequency. These are minimums. If we can get to them more regularly, we do, but that work is performed by our Perryville prison crews, and we have 2 of those. Okay, any questions? All right. Here are the issues. The issues are that current zoning ordinance and Chapter 10 of the City Code conflict. For the best way to say it is maintenance is, and the enforcement thereof is defined in the zoning ordinance and not in City Code. Typically, from a code enforcement standpoint, you would want that those type of requirements to be found in City Code and not the zoning ordinance. The responsibility for landscape maintenance and right-of-ways along arterial streets, I've talked about this, they differ throughout the city based on whether it's commercial or residential area. We run into inconsistencies in maintenance. If we have a higher level or a lower level of maintenance along right-of-ways adjacent to HOA development tracts, you have a very different look. You could have something that looks extremely well maintained right next to something that is not well maintained, and we've had a number of those issues that have been brought up over the last year and a half, especially as HOAs have suffered in terms of funding sources. There are inconsistencies in lines of demarcation that separate the development tracts and right-of-ways, i.e. my point to the meandering sidewalks. Current practice when approving developments differs from zoning ordinance. In recent years, the engineering in going through and approving plats has actually written on the plat that HOAs are responsible for the right-of-way on an arterial street. That currently, if you went completely with the zoning ordinance, is not necessarily the way we want it to be done. And to Joe's point earlier, enforcement of the current zoning ordinance is difficult and complicated
That was gonna be my
for
question.
all of the issues mentioned previously.
So the way it currently is set up, it would be more difficult on some of the issues if we have on the commercial where they're not taking care of that right away because of some of the conflicts. You may have some trouble enforcing them doing that, or is it in certain areas the enforcement?
It's commercial areas is not necessarily difficult to enforce because it's pretty cut and dry that the commercial areas are responsible for the right of way.
Okay.
where we run into issues from a code perspective is adjacent commercial property owners, one taking care of their property better than another, or one taking care of their property and the other commercial property not taking care of theirs at all. We recently had that issue on McDowell Road. You've had property owners change hands. They're not aware of what they're responsible for. You have to bring it to their attention, and typically it gets taken care of.
I have a question. When code is called out to take care of an issue, more than likely it's because of weeds and things like that. But within code, would a private developer or HOA or anything be required to replace plants?
By the way the zoning ordinance is written right now, they are responsible for replacement.
Well, responsible is different than required.
By zoning ordinance, they are responsible for replacement. I think where we run into issues with replacement is there are ideal times of the year to do it, and there are ideal times of the year not to do it. And if you have things that die anytime between May and September, you're not going to require or make somebody responsible for replacing that at that time of year. It makes absolutely no sense. So part of what we need to look into defining in terms of requirements and replacement of lost vegetation, shrubs, trees, is defining a time frame in which they have to do that. So typically, if you define a time frame within a year, you're going to be fairly okay. You can't say 6 months because somebody may push 6 months, something dies in February, or they may push 6 months, and next thing you know, that you don't want them replacing it in August.
That's understandable. I think that the real reason I'm asking this is because for the last 3 years, it's bothered me. Actually, it's been a lot longer than 3 years. The fact that our city does not have a plant replacement policy, I don't see how we can insist and regulate that HOAs and private developers have to replace.
Agreed.
We want them to, but we don't even have our own replacement policy. And I know that financially, it's another thing that we just can't afford right now, but we need to have that discussion. It's gone on far too long that
Well,
we
I think
have
along
no...
with that discussion, we need to be re-looking at the amount of plantings we require.
Sure.
Because Pebble Creek people approached me on about Virginia this weekend, about Virginia and Saraville, and I talked to Mike about it. And one item was there was a lot of pine trees in that area, but there were a lot of weeds, and nobody was cleaning it up. And after talking to Mike, that part, it belongs to the HOA to do. Unfortunately, it's been a long time, and they're still not doing it, so they asked about the code. The other thing they asked about, when a plant dies in a very area that's very dense with other plants, it doesn't need to be replaced. And I asked them about transplanting, because if you go down Saraville in Virginia, there are some areas that are so dense that if you could take 4 or 5 plants and spread them out in the other areas. And Mike's answer to me, Mike, on transplanting.
Yeah, transplanting is completely dependent upon the age of the plant, how long it's been in the ground in its existing location, the type of plant. Sometimes it's actually ends up being better long-term to just, instead of transplanting, to plant something new. Because when you transplant a plant, you are stressing it. I mean, you're pulling it out of the ground. It's been there for 1, 2, 3, 5 years. You're completely stressing it and putting it somewhere else. And then to the point of, depending upon the time of year in which you do that and the plant, you may have wasted a lot of manpower and a lot of time resetting up your irrigation, pulling that plant out, planting it, next thing you know, it dying in 6 months to a year when you could have just taken care of it. So you potentially can create recurring problems. We occasionally will transplant, but for the most part, we are much better off at buying new. To your point, Councilmember Osborne, it is, I would have to say that From our perspective, we have done it where we have had to go in and take out a bunch of plants that may not have necessarily been the right plant at the right place. For example, that have created traffic sightline issues, and where we've had to take out a long stretch of plants and replace them with something that's more appropriate for that area. But onesie, twosies, we have not. And part of it has to do with the fact that the plants were so dense originally when they were planted. As they've grown 2, 3, 4 years down the road, it doesn't make sense to try and wedge another plant in there.
Do we have areas that, we're talking about a water issue? We just got another report on the water issue, or lack of water, and desert plants. Since I was not around when the overlay or the landscaping overlay, do we just plant desert plants, or are we on over that edge where we have a lot of watering to do in our city, and could we eliminate some of that?
It's interesting. A couple of things that have taken place over the last 2 or 3 years. There was a water audit completed and recommendations provided throughout the city. Obviously, Parks was a major player in that. And so that water audit has had some Tier 1 implementations, as well as getting into some of the Tier 2. For lack of a better phrase, a low-hanging fruit that doesn't cost us a ton of money, especially in these times. However, as a result of that, one of the things that we went through with our landscape plan reviewer, Angie Tatum, who is a master gardener in engineering, with water, with community development, as well as parks, was identifying, even just from a water conservation standpoint, right plant, right place. In other words, what are the best plants that we should be planting in each of the specific areas? And I think we have honed in on that list. And so when we are reviewing plans, we have that plant list to go off of that has been recently modified as of just end of last year, beginning of this year. So from a water conservation standpoint, that is one of the key elements associated with that.
I have a question. Sure. With regard to some of the developments, there was a Dave Brown development kind of just west of the Walmart, and another empty development there, and you start to see these huge tumbleweeds go there, but it's on the HOA side. And I know you say you only take the sidewalk to the road, but how do we get those cleaned up? Because you see those, especially after the rainy season, really start to come up.
Code typically takes the lead on that. They will try to either work with the developer and or the financial institution that owns that property as a result of bankruptcy. It's obviously not high on the financial institution's list to spend money on those things. Code does have a pot of money. It is a very limited pot of money that they can draw on to be able to pay a private contractor to come in, get that taken care of, and try and get reimbursed later on.
So we do back charge them and send them bills?
We try, exactly.
Do we have to get technical permission to be on that property to do that?
Yeah, I think
Yes,
that,
we do.
Yeah.
So I would think that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think once it becomes a code issue legally, we have that, but John Rourke to answer that one.
There's an abatement process. You give them notice, and after a certain amount of time, if they don't respond, then you go on. You clean up the property, send them the notice to be reimbursed, or you lien the property. So there's an abatement process.
It all takes time.
Yes, it's minimum it's 30-day
Yeah,
notice, and
yeah.
it's usually a 45, 60-day period.
Yeah, because I've seen like tumbleweeds taller than me on some of these properties.
Yeah.
Well, when you bring some of this back, you're I guess we're going to be looking at some point. I really do think we need to have a quality control policy discussion and about replacements. And I mean, guys, there's areas that's years and years that have gone without anything, and some of them are in the center of our city. And so I know that the finances aren't available at the time, but it's still quality, and it still needs to. everything else will be pushed aside, and we'll end up, another 5 years from now with nothing in some of these areas, and we just need to.
And some of them are just dirt. I mean,
It's
there's not
just-
even a nice
have
gravel.
nice
Like you
granite,
I was gonna say, you
something.
get that
That's what I'm
thicker like they
saying.
have up towards Australia, that really red, those big rocks, rather than just that little.
Something needs to
Unfortunately,
be.
those rocks are really expensive, but I remember we paid for those little rocks in our yard instead
it's
of
back
grass.
to quality control.
But
But
it
it might
does
take the
need-
planting in the water.
Maybe in the future, we need to be looking at some kind of rock or some kind of decorative rock of some sort, whatever level it is, instead of so many plants, or other things instead of plants that give an architectural design to. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that I think we're going to have to think about that, especially on the water end of it, so I'm sorry.
I think Councilmember Osborne is very correct, though, and we do need a replacement policy.
Yeah.
And also, we need a new installation policy. You look at Van Buren. The city ran out of money, and we never put in any landscaping. It looks horrible driving up and down Van Buren, and that shouldn't occur.
You're right. Holding that intent of something, projects like this are really a beautification of the city and maintaining that beautification. Because if we let the city go, then we'd like any other city.
Weeds are, in a sense, the broken window theory.
I agree.
Absolutely. Okay. On to the alternatives. The first alternative is basically to do nothing. We would do things exactly the way they are written in the zoning ordinance. The only difference is that we would remove it from the zoning ordinance and place it in Chapter 10 of the City Code. Number 2 is that we just maintain arterial and collector medians. And number 3 would be that we maintain arterial medians only. I point out at the bottom in big bold print, all alternatives are prospective only, meaning for new growth, and I'll define that a little bit more for you 2 slides ahead. Our recommendation is that we would prospectively going forward continue to maintain arterial and collectors throughout the city, whether it's residential or commercial property. It's much more cost effective, it's efficient, and obviously you don't run into the where is the right-of-way line and who's responsible for what. It's currently in practice for commercial and non-residential properties to do it this way. And third, it would create that consistency from commercial and residential areas, not necessarily in terms of just frequency of service, but it would also it would create a consistency in terms of look. We won't necessarily be able to control what property owners do from one property to the other, but we can also include in any type of code a minimum standard by which they would have to maintain right-of-ways adjacent to arterials. Prospective, I'll define this for you. City will continue to maintain right-of-way and median landscaping per zoning ordinance for any and all of the following: existing conditions, including executed development agreements, wildflower ranch as an example. Any plats that have been accepted by City Council that designate landscape maintenance responsibility prior to or at time of adoption of revised Chapter 10 of City Code, and all landscape and maintenance plans that have been approved by the city prior to or at the time of adoption of City Code. So basically, anything that isn't existing and anything that we haven't signed off on at this point, anything that would come to us in the future, that is how we would apply any changes to the zoning ordinance. Our next steps would be, based on your direction, we would bring back for public hearing and adoption basically 2 actions. There may be a third. We'll work with legal. But zoning ordinance text amendment, basically what that would do is remove all of the landscape and maintenance requirements that are in Article 5-1-2 and take them based on whatever direction we get from City Council and place them in Chapter 10-3-3 of the City Code.
Good report. Any questions?
Any further questions?
Just one real quick one. From a policy standpoint, do we have a policy of of xeriscape, or what type of plants go in the median right now?
From a, I don't want to say it's a policy standpoint, Joe, as much as it is a plant list. But we try to remain fairly consistent, and one of the big debates that we've had is the palm trees and the type of palm tree. Obviously, that date diamond cut palm tree it's far more attractive than the other palm trees that exist. But we do have a plant list that is recommended associated with median planting. It is not a policy per se.
Is it more xeriscape, slow growing, that type of thing?
When you say xeriscape, I think our plant list that we came up with very much had water conservation in mind. And though we can't require everything to be xeriscaping, because then it's in conflict with the zoning ordinance that defines what those planting guidelines are. So we took the plant list, looked at it from all of the different angles: right place, right plant, right place, water conservation, applied that to the zoning ordinance that has the planting guidelines in it, and came up with a list that, for lack of a better phrase, works well in medians and works well from a water conservation standpoint.
Yeah, and from my perspective, as long as those two things are met, because I think long-term from a water standpoint, if we can keep the cost of the water usage down, at the same time, those plants that don't grow quite as fast, we can keep the cost of trimming and maintenance down, then I think we're ahead of the game, from moving forward.
For every square foot of landscaping we have, it costs us about 1/3 of a cent annually for water. And for every meter we put in, it's $240 for meters, and we have hundreds of meters throughout the city. 1/3 of a cent doesn't sound like much, but when you add that up to 22 million square feet,
I know.
it's a lot.
That's my point on the other side. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Nothing further.
Thank you. That was
You're
a
very
good
welcome.
report.
Thank you.
Now we've come to the time for council report on current events. Does anybody have anything to report?
Oh, I just want to say I did attend, we drug ourselves out to go see the Boo Festival, the Field of Screams, and it was a great event. And I just, since Mike's here, I just wanted to let everyone know, it was just absolutely wonderful. It was packed,
Yes,
so it was great.
We had over 6,000 people
6,000
there.
something, yeah, absolutely. Joanne, you had something this week, the business.
Oh,
Report on that.
I've been in Iowa for the last 4 days.
But you had a business workshop. you might
Yes,
wanna
we
talk
had
about.
business workshop that went very well about HR issues. Actually, I did have, and I noticed it's not on here. Can we not ask direction of staff?
Yeah, we can right after this,
Well,
right?
it's
Or-
not
or
on
the
here, so
dir-
I didn't know.
Well, I don't know if it's actually a report, but we have
I
a
just-
manager summary, no.
I
guess
had
not.
one.
Can we do that at work session?
It's not on here.
On here.
It's not on there, can't do it, sorry.
To ask.
Tell me later.
Oh, okay.
That's it?
That's
Joe?
No, all I can say is we went to the opening of was it Buelo's, and also the Japanese steakhouse was there with my
Reba's.
Reba's, excuse me.
Yeah.
But I was at the Japanese steakhouse there, the new one that was opened with my brother, and it was packed. I mean, it was literally packed. So hopefully, business is starting to pick up a little bit there on the restaurants. So.
Yeah, we never reported that we had attended that opening of that. It was pretty fantastic. The interior, they have imported things from Japan, so it's worthwhile. Councilman Sousa. Well, I have a lot, so I'm going to say them. I went to Joanne's workshop, and it was really a good workshop, Joanne. You've done a great job on that. We had a GPEC International Leadership Council with lots of information, and I did have some of the information put in your boxes about that, so I hope it'll be usable for you. Joanne and I had an audit committee meeting, which we attended. You forgot about that. The ambassador group I had through GPEC, we toured the Tessera Solar Catcher Field in Peoria, and it was quite interesting, and about 60 people wanted to see this, and it was very, very interesting. And these solar catchers don't use much water source to it, so it was really interesting. I attended the Best Westmark Best of the West Awards, and in a moment I'd like someone to come up and fire. Are they here? And tell them.
Paul's here.
Paul, could you come up and tell us about the honorable mention?
Ooh, got an honorable mention.
Yeah.
All right.
Good evening. We submitted, in partnership with West Valley Hospital, our ability to be able to provide care and treatment of a heart attack victim. And we've been watching this over the last, probably about last year. And we were able to collect data along with West Valley Hospital. And we've shown a dramatic decrease in our times, which we call door to balloon. So basically it's from the time that we are alerting the hospital, walking through the door of the hospital, to the patient gets their vessel opened in the angio suite, where they're putting a balloon and a wire through the groin up into the heart vessels, finding the affected heart vessel and opening that vessel and restoring blood flow to the heart. Our work with our new monitors from Philips, they're really not that new. We've had them for about 2.5 years now. But the ability for us to be able to transmit the 12 lead from the field has saved upwards of 20 minutes per call. So we've seen a dramatic decrease in our time from our patients arriving in the cath lab. And currently, versus other cities in our area, we're really blowing them out of the water. The national standard for door-to-balloon time is about 90 minutes. They say that's the best. We're on average right now about 70 minutes. So we've had times of 34 minutes, which is, I mean, it's just really incredible, especially where they came from. They actually came from EMR. Crews identified the patient right away, recognized what was going on. They faxed the 12 lead, got the patient to the hospital, into the cath lab. We didn't even stop in the ER, and the patient did great. And the biggest piece we wanted to send to out there was that we are making an impact on the patients' lives, but that also has a rolling impact on the economy, in them being able to get back to their lives that they had before the event. So it's really remarkable what the firefighters and paramedics are doing out there, and I think a lot of that thanks goes to you guys as well. I think, probably three years ago, I came to council asking for money to upgrade our monitors, and you allowed us to do that. We got a great deal from the distributor, and we were able to put all of our training and new equipment out there for the troops, and I mean, they've been doing a great job with it. So all the work's on them. I just kind of had the vision, but they've been the ones that have been doing all the work all the time. So
they got the honorary reward, but we were hoping they would get the best of the West.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen.
Well, you're the best
Congratulations.
of our
Right.
Congratulations.
Best for us. We're
yeah,
happy.
it was a nice honor for everybody. So it was a very nice night.
Well, thank you, because I thought that was
Thank you.
worthwhile for the public to hear. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I also attended the Field of Screams, and it was Ron and I went in later after most of it was done, but the costuming was fantastic, and the turnout in costumes was unbelievable. And the number was 6,029 people showed up there. And the other thing that I want to bring up, the revenues of the rides were 10,590, and that's with giving tickets back. And I wanted to suggest, and we talked to Mike, is that the lines were incredible for the rides, and we definitely need more rides next year. To spread that out a little bit, because
Having
some people gave
yes.
up and asked for their money back, and even with that, this is but the biggest thing is it was a family event, and mothers and fathers and children were dressed in costumes, sometimes in the same mode. So I thank staff and Mike; they did a great job. That was really, really good. We appreciate that. And so that's about it. And so, anything from the city manager?
Nothing.
All right. Well, I won't be here next week, and either with your lawyer here, because we'll be attending the Arizona Town Hall at the Grand Canyon. So with that, meeting's adjourned.
Good job, George.